Good morning. Leadership is a moment, a journey, and a symphony. Every leader has to be a sage on the stage and at times a guide by your side. Through all stages, effective leaders connect, engage, and influence in ways that seem almost magical and mysterious. Yet, research in the neurosciences and neuropsychologies tell us that these leaders follow certain principles in how they think, speak, and act. This podcast, The Sage and Guide, will explore, amplify, and celebrate such leaders, their strategies, and their successes at work and in life. The Sage and Guide podcast will also showcase presentations and conversations with such leaders. I'm your host Raju Manthian. I'm a speaker, trainer, and a coach based in the Philippines. I do hope you enjoy the Sage and Guide podcast. So, one of the first things that I'd like to talk about on this podcast, The Sage and the Guide, and which I think is extremely important to either work towards being a sage or work towards being a guide. And that important thing is to know yourself, know thyself, as has been said by many philosophers, and also in the good book itself. Know thyself first, and the world will become your playground. Aristotle or Plato or Shakespeare, not sure. But the fact remains that unless and until you know exactly who you are, what you stand for, what your deepest held values and beliefs are, then you can't move forward, because you won't know who you are and where you want to go. You need to know who you are. Gandhi said that a man is the center of an ever-growing circle of influence. And in my opinion, I think a man is the center of not just a circle, but a sphere, a 360-degree sphere. And he's the center of that sphere. And knowing that center, knowing that crux is extremely important. So know thyself, who you are. You can also call it your identity. So what is your identity? Your identity is the sum total of all that you believe in and all that you value. These beliefs and these values over your lifetime have accumulated into a single entity, you. Your genetic structure, your environment, your influences, your education, and your experiences keep stacking up into becoming you. For a large part of your life, you have little control on these elements of your life, but over time you begin to take charge. You begin to choose, and you begin to carve out your own self, quote unquote self. You begin to become a Michael Angelo to your own David. Yes, it does matter how early on in your life you pick up the chisel and the hammer, and how consciously, how courageously, how creatively, compassionately, and constructively you begin to use these tools to build and chisel yourself into who you are. In my experience, there are many schools of thought and a variety of processes which will equip you with the abilities to carve out your desired life after you chisel your own persona. For you, may I offer just 3 questions which will walk you through a similar process of coaching yourself, of chiseling yourself into a persona that you really are and really want to be. Reflecting upon these questions deeply will help you know thyself so much better. It'll will cut away all the assumptions and the false impressions that you have about yourself. And answering these questions with courage and precision will also propel you into a brighter future. So I suggest take a piece of paper and a pen and write down your responses in simple and succinct words to these questions. If you can, sketch, like draw, doodle, and add images to your thinking, all the more better. So here's question number one. To kind of chisel out your own persona, your own self. The question is, what are a few human behaviors that turn you on the most? What are a few human behaviors that turn you on the most? When I say turn you on, I mean they either appeal or anger you massively. If they appeal to you, then they are something you value. If they anger you, then the opposite of those behaviors are what you value. For example, someone lies and that makes you angry. So then your value lies in not lying or cheating or being dishonest. So the question is, what are a few human behaviors that turn you on the most? And that's the question you need to answer. At this point, also let me briefly define values. Values are strongly held beliefs about life, living, about what is right, wrong, or fair. Our values influence the choices we make and the actions we take. Some values are imposed and influenced upon us, while others are our true choices. It is possible that you may value wealth, and it is possible that you will value commitment, like I do. The first is a terminal value, sometimes called the goal, while the second one is an instrumental value. A terminal goal or a goal value is something that you want to achieve and acquire and hold, while the second one is something that you constantly work at, that you constantly use and utilize to build your life. So commitment is something you use and utilize to build your life, while wealth is a terminal value. So you need to achieve it. Choosing a few from both types of values is fine as long as you reflect deeply, honestly, and think through the pros and cons of each value. To remember that who you are and what you want, your identity and your intentions are not stationary objects. They are in a state of constant flux, improving, growing, and evolving every day. Many years ago, I used to value personal freedom. Today, I value kindness and compassion a wee bit more than personal freedom. That means I'd rather limit myself if it calls upon me to be compassionate and kind towards others. So that being the first question, answer it thoroughly on that piece of paper, sketch or write it. The question again is, what are a few human behaviors that turn you on the most? The second question, to kind of chisel out your own persona, is, what are those one or two things that most consume your time and energy on a daily basis? What consumes my energy most is putting together sciences, philosophies, and practices of human behavior. Most of my time is spent thinking, reflecting, writing, presenting, and publishing principles for people development. I value growth and emancipation. What might be consuming your energies might be business ideas, news, literature, discussions, and studies. Thus, your values might be enterprise, productivity, wealth accumulation, or even service towards mankind. You could be a parent whose life and times are filled with how to raise and nurture children. In that case, your values might be parental love or family, quote unquote. You may value family. Anything that consumes your time and energy. And as long as you know and recognize it as something that occupies your mind and heart, that is what you value. There is no need to compare our values with others. There is no need to envy or measure up to other people's values. Now, this is not a contest. Everyone is unique. All we are doing here is acknowledging what we indulge in most of the time. What we indulge in most of the time is what we value. What we value is part and parcel of our persona. 2 questions. The third question is, what do you dream about all the time? More specifically, what do you daydream about? What is your dream while you're wide awake? What are your dreams when you're wide awake? What is that constant conversation that is going on in your head about the future? No, not about what happened in the past. What is it that you think about when you sit by a window and gaze into the clouds? What kind of a reverie do you get lost in while you're wide awake and calm? When you reflect upon this question, be cautious of words like, I should be doing that, I need to be doing that, I must do this, I have to do this, etc., etc. Statements with words such as these are driven by values imposed and influenced by your environment and others. You want to listen to statements that lighten up your daydreams. Statements with words like, I choose, I want to, I love to, I'd like to. It'll make me happy to do so, etc., etc. The thoughts during these quiet moments are a dance between your unconscious and your conscious mind. It is a challenging conversation to capture. It occurs all the time, but it is hard to put it on paper and kind of become cognizant of it. But when cued in by this question, it is possible to remember the essence of your dreams and of your daydreaming. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, these 3 questions. Let me repeat those 3 questions one more time. The question number 1 is, what are a few human behaviors that turn you on the most? The second question is, what are those 1 or 2 things that most occupy your energy and daily time? Question number 3, what do you dream about? More specifically, what do you daydream about? So answering these questions will kind of filter down, kind of shortlist who you are. And once you have this, like really down to just a few words, just a few values and a few sentences describing yourself, and that will be your identity. That will be your true self. And when you know this, when you come to terms with this, I'm not saying that this has to be positive or negative. It is you. It doesn't have to be an ideal that is correct or beautiful in the eyes of the world. No, it has to be something that is totally you. And when you come to terms with that, when you know thyself thoroughly and deeply and powerfully, that becomes a powerful starting point to change your world. That becomes a powerful starting point to become authentic. That becomes your tool. That becomes your cornerstone to becoming a stage and a guide. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and it was helpful to you. If it was, then the most helpful thing you can do is to leave your review of this podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Your reviews will keep this podcast going and serving others. It will also be great if you will share this podcast with your friends and family. And if you do need my help with your leadership development and public speaking skills, Please do look me up at www.manthian.com and www.rajumanthian.com. Adios and mabuhay.